I've explored more than my fair share of abandoned buildings in my life. Factories, schools, even a hospital wing once, but nothing has ever haunted me the way that old theater in Detroit did. They called it the Crown Palace, though by the time I stepped inside, it was nothing but a husk of its former self. Built in 1920, back when the city was roaring, it had once been a glittering movie palace with velvet curtains, gold-trimmed balconies, and chandeliers big enough to light a ballroom. But when the money dried up and the crowds stopped coming, it shut its doors. For nearly 50 years, it just sat there. The night I went in, the air was biting cold. My flashlight beam cut across piles of plaster that had fallen from the ornate ceiling, revealing murals of faded angels with blank eyes. The velvet seats, once plush and elegant, were shredded, springs poking out like broken ribs. I remember the smell most of all: mildew, rotting wood, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. I made my way down the central aisle toward the stage. My boots echoed on the warped floorboards, the sound rolling through the empty chamber like whispers. The silence of the place was almost oppressive, pressing against my chest. That's when I heard it. Soft sobbing. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, a trick of the acoustics. But no, there it was again. A childlike cry, fragile and hushed, drifting from the balcony above. I froze. Every instinct told me to leave, but curiosity, that dangerous little hook, kept me rooted in place. Slowly, I turned my flashlight toward the balcony. The beam caught torn curtains and rows of decaying seats, but nothing moved. Still, the sobbing went on. I decided to climb up. The grand staircase creaked beneath my weight, each step sounding like a groan from something deep in the bones of the building. Halfway up, the crying stopped. I stood there, breath caught in my throat, waiting. Then it started again, only softer this time. Behind me, I spun around so fast the flashlight slipped in my grip, the beam slicing across cracked walls and empty space. No one was there. My heart was hammering. I tried to convince myself it was just sound carrying strangely. Old theaters are notorious for their acoustics, right? But that explanation didn't stick for long, because the sobbing moved again. This time, it wasn't on the balcony or behind me. It was close, right in the main hall where I had just stood minutes earlier. I gripped the railing, leaning forward to listen. The crying grew louder, more desperate, like someone mourning, or maybe even calling out for help. My stomach turned cold. Against better judgment, I went back down. I reached the stage, the spotlight platform looming above me like a dark crown. The sobbing had stopped again, only silence. My flashlight jittered as my hands trembled. I whispered out loud, "Hello?" The sound that answered wasn't crying. It was a laugh, a soft, breathless chuckle that seemed to come from the wings of the stage. My whole body went rigid. I swung the light toward the curtains, expecting to see some squatter or prankster hiding out. Nothing. Just moth-eaten velvet, heavy and unmoving. I told myself I was done. Enough was enough. I turned toward the exit, quickening my pace. And then, a scream. High-pitched, echoing through the chamber, rattling the plaster. I nearly dropped the light again. The sound came from the balcony, but when I whipped the beam upward, the seats were empty. Completely empty. That's when I noticed something strange. One of the velvet seats wasn't torn like the others. It looked newer. The fabric smooth, unstained. And sitting upright in that single seat was a shadow. A human outline, darker than the dark around it. It didn't move. It didn't breathe, but I felt its gaze lock onto me. I couldn't move. My legs were stone. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow sank down like it melted right into the seat. The sobbing started again, not from the balcony, not from the stage, but right in my ear. I bolted. My boots hammered against the broken tile as I ran, stumbling over rubble, not daring to look behind me. I burst out through the front doors, gasping in the night air. Hands shaking so violently I dropped my flashlight. When I finally calmed down enough to drive away, I looked back at the theater one last time. And I swear, through the cracked windows of the balcony, I saw a figure standing, watching. I never went back. But sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I can still hear that crying, faint, like it's just down the hall, like the theater followed me home. I've walked through a lot of abandoned places in my life, factories, train depots, hospitals, but there's something about schools that hits differently. Maybe it's because schools are meant to hold life, energy, laughter. When you strip that away and leave nothing but empty halls, what's left feels wrong. It's not just silence, it's the absence of what should be there. That's what drew me to the old Franklin Elementary in Ohio. It had been shut down since the mid-1970s, condemned after funding dried up and the town shrank. I'd heard rumors about it, vandalized hallways, broken windows, stories from locals who swore they heard children's voices inside late at night. Most people avoided it, but for me, that was reason enough to go in. The building stood like a corpse at the edge of town, its brick walls streaked black from decades of weather. The playground out front buried under weeds. The swing set creaked in the wind, even though there was no one near it. I pushed the rusted door open, and the sound of my own breath filled the stale air. The smell hit me first, old paper, mold, and something sharp and acrid like burned plastic. Inside, time had stopped. Posters from the 1970s still clung to the walls, torn reading charts, faded science fair projects, a safety drill poster with cartoon kids ducking under desks. Lockers hung open like mouths mid-scream. Paint peeled in sheets, and broken glass crunched under my boots. Every step echoed, bouncing back to me down corridors that hadn't heard footsteps in nearly 50 years. I wandered room by room, flashlight cutting through dust motes that swirled in the beam. A math classroom still had books scattered across the floor, pages swollen from rain. The cafeteria smelled faintly of rot, trays stacked like forgotten relics in corners. The auditorium was the worst rows of seats gutted by fire. The stage collapsed in on itself. It was like the soul of the building had been hollowed out. Then I found the classroom. It was at the far end of the second floor, door still on its hinges. I stepped inside and froze. Unlike the others, this room looked preserved. The desks were still in neat rows, though covered in dust. A globe sat on the teacher's desk, yellowed and cracked, and on the wall, stretching the entire length of the room, was a chalkboard. The green slate was dull, streaked white with old chalk residue. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe just the need to touch history, but I walked up and brushed a patch of dust away with my sleeve. The sound of grit scratching against the slate echoed louder than it should have. I stared at the clean streak, almost expecting something to appear. Nothing did. That's when it started. A sound cut through the silence. Sharp, shrill, unmistakable. The screech of chalk dragged across slate. I froze, blood hammering in my ears. The board in front of me was empty, but the sound was right there. I backed up, my flashlight shaking, and then before my eyes, white lines began to form. Jagged, uneven strokes cutting into the clean patch I had made. Letters, 2 words. Get out. The chalk was moving on its own, dragging across the board with invisible hands, carving the words deeper and deeper, until bits of white dust rained down onto the teacher's desk. I stumbled backward so hard I nearly tripped over a desk. My throat went dry. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick, maybe a draft, maybe old chalk dust falling in a weird pattern. But I couldn't, because the screeching didn't stop. Even after the words finished, the sound kept going, like something was still writing, faster now, more desperate. My flashlight beam caught faint scrawls racing across the board, circles, slashes, lines intersecting like frantic scribbles. It looked less like writing and more like something clawing to get out. And then the whispers began. At first, it was low, like a hiss beneath the sound of chalk. But as I stood there, paralyzed, I heard it clearly. Children's voices, layered over one another, whispering so fast I couldn't make out the words. Dozens of them, maybe more. Some sounded like laughter, some like crying, some chanting nonsense syllables. It built into a chorus that filled the room, bouncing off the walls until it felt like the voices were pressing against my skin. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted. The desks clattered as I shoved past, my boots hammering against the wood floors. I didn't look back. The whispers seemed to follow me, spilling out into the hallway, chasing me down the stairs. My flashlight flickered as I ran. Beams of light catching children's drawings still taped to the walls, smiling stick figures with eyes scratched out. When I hit the front doors, they wouldn't budge. My hands slipped on the rusted handles as I yanked and pulled, heart slamming in my chest. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, closer, like they were right at the back of my neck. I kicked the door with everything I had, the old wood giving way with a crack. I stumbled out into the daylight, gasping, collapsing onto the cracked pavement outside. And then it stopped. Silence. I looked back through the shattered windows, expecting to see movement. Maybe chalk still scrawling across the board. But the building sat quiet, dead, as if nothing had happened at all. I never went back to Franklin Elementary, but I can still hear it sometimes. When the house is quiet late at night, the faint scrape of chalk on slate, followed by the whisper of children's voices. And I know, if I ever set foot inside that school again, the message on the board would be waiting for me. Get out. And this time, I don't think I'd make it. I've seen some strange things in the ruins of old mining towns, but nothing has ever unnerved me the way that stairwell did. West Virginia is full of places like that, towns that lived and died with the coal industry. When the mines closed, the people left, and what remained was little more than broken shells of buildings, rusted machinery, and silence heavy enough to crush you. I was exploring one of those towns late one autumn afternoon, the kind of day when the air smells faintly of smoke from someone's distant wood stove, and the hills seem to fold in on you. The mining office was half collapsed, its roof sagging like a broken spine. Windows were gone, and wind howled through the empty frames, carrying with it the faint stink of coal dust that had lingered there for decades. Inside, the place was wrecked file cabinets tipped over, papers plastered to the floor in yellowed clumps from years of rain leaking in. A calendar from 1973 still clung to one wall, curling at the edges, frozen in time. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. That's when I found the stairs. They sat in the back corner of the office, partly hidden behind fallen beams. At first glance, they looked ordinary, just a set of narrow concrete steps, crumbling at the edges. But they didn't lead anywhere. They climbed up maybe 12 steps before slamming directly into a brick wall. No door, no landing. Just a wall that shouldn't have been there. I remember standing at the base, shining my flashlight upward, trying to figure out why anyone would build stairs to nowhere. That's when I heard it. Boots. The sound was faint but steady, coming from above me. Heavy work boots, descending step by step, measured, slow. The kind of steps you feel in your chest before you hear them. I froze, every nerve in my body going rigid. My flashlight shook in my hand as the sound grew closer. The boots were moving down the stairwell, yet there was no one there. The stairs ended at a wall. There was no place for anyone to be. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was rubble shifting, maybe the wind playing tricks. But then the first riser beneath my boot vibrated just slightly, like it was sharing weight with someone unseen. The steps kept coming. Step, step, step. I backed away, but the sound followed, like something was pacing me one tread for every one of mine. The air grew colder, damp with the smell of earth and sweat, like the inside of a mine shaft. I whispered out loud, "Hello?" My voice cracked in the empty building. No answer. The steps stopped, right at the bottom of the stairwell, not 3 feet from where I stood. My skin crawled. I could feel the weight of someone standing there, though my flashlight beam cut through nothing but dust and stone. Then, just as suddenly, the steps started again. But this time, they weren't coming down. They were going up, slow, steady, receding back into nothingness, until the last step landed against the wall at the top, and then silence. I should have left. Any sane person would have left. But something in me, the same foolish instinct that brought me into abandoned places to begin with, wanted to test it. So I put my foot back on the first riser. The moment my weight touched it, the boots began again. Descending. I jerked my foot away. The sound stopped. My heart hammered in my chest, my mouth dry as dust. I tested it again. One step onto the riser and the boots came. Slow, heavy, step by step, always coming down. The realization hit me like ice. Whatever was on those stairs wasn't bound to the building. It was bound to that act, someone stepping onto the stairs. And each time, it repeated its descent, as if trapped in an endless cycle. I tried one last time, pushing my luck further than I should have. I climbed 2 steps. The boots thundered down faster, closer, like they were rushing toward me. The air grew heavy, pressing on my chest, and I swore I felt the heat of someone's breath at my ear. I bolted, leaping down and stumbling back into the main hall. For a moment, the office was silent again. Then, from deep inside the stairwell, a single sound echoed back at me. Not boots this time, words. A man's voice, low and rough, whispering, "Get back to work." I didn't wait to hear more. I ran out of that building, stumbling into the daylight like I'd surfaced from underground. My lungs burned. My hands shook so badly I could barely start my car. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear it again. That steady rhythm of boots descending, coming closer step by step, until it feels like they're right behind me. And I know if I'd stayed on those stairs one moment longer, I wouldn't be here to tell you this. Because those weren't just stairs to nowhere. They were stairs that belonged to someone who never left. I've been in a lot of abandoned places, but the mills in New England, they carry a weight all their own. Those massive brick structures were once the heartbeat of entire towns. You can still feel the echo of it when you walk through the sense of thousands of lives, entire generations who spent their days inside those walls. But when the machines went silent, it left something behind. Not just emptiness, something heavier, something that lingers. That's what drew me to the old Whitmore textile mill in Massachusetts. The place had been closed for decades. Locals swore it was dangerous not just because of collapsing beams and rusted iron, but because people heard things there. Children's voices. Machinery starting up on its own. I told myself it was just stories to keep vandals out. I should have listened. It was late afternoon when I went in. The mill sat on the edge of town, a hulking red brick building with broken windows that looked like jagged teeth. I stepped through a side entrance where the door had rotted away, and the air that hit me was damp, stale, and cold, as if the sun hadn't touched the inside of that place in years. My flashlight beam cut across endless rows of rusted machines, their belts sagging, gears locked in place, all frozen mid-motion, as if the workers had just walked away one day and never came back. Dust lay thick on the concrete, and my boots stirred up little clouds that sparkled in the beam. The silence was suffocating. I made my way deeper into the mill, weaving through the machinery. Every few steps, I thought I heard something metal shifting. A faint tap echoing in the distance. Probably just the building settling, I told myself. These places are always alive with creaks and groans. But there was something sharper in those sounds. Something purposeful. And then I saw it. A ball. It rolled slowly across the concrete floor from the shadows ahead. Not fast. Not like it had fallen or been kicked. But steady. Deliberate. It stopped right in the glow of my flashlight, no more than 5 feet from me. I froze. Every instinct screamed to get out, but I couldn't move. My mind scrambled for explanations, maybe an animal, maybe rubble shifting somewhere. Maybe I'd kicked something without realizing, but no. I'd been standing still. Then I heard it. A giggle, high-pitched, childlike. The sound skipped across the walls of the mill, echoing between the rusted machines, bouncing around me until I couldn't tell where it came from. My stomach dropped. There were no children there. There hadn't been for 50 years. The ball moved again. Just a small nudge, like invisible fingers had pushed it. And it rolled the last few inches to stop against the toe of my boot. I remember whispering, "Hello?" Into the darkness, my voice shaking so hard the word barely formed. The mill swallowed the sound. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the giggle came again, closer this time, right at the edge of the machines beside me. I swung the flashlight toward the noise. Empty. Just rust and shadow. But as the beam passed over the machinery, I caught movement. Small. Quick. Like a figure darting just out of sight. I backed up. Every muscle in my body coiled. My light shook as I swept it across the room again and again, searching. And then behind me I heard the patter of footsteps. Light, quick, like a child running barefoot on concrete. I spun so fast I nearly dropped the light. Nothing. Just the ball still pressed against my boot. That's when the air changed. It grew heavier, colder. My breath misted in front of me, even though the day outside had been warm. From deep inside the rows of machines, I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost playful. I couldn't make out the words, but it was a child's voice. And it was calling me. My fight or flight kicked in. I turned, heading fast for the exit, my boots slamming against the concrete. But the faster I went, the more it felt like something was keeping pace with me. Footsteps in rhythm with mine, giggles chasing me through the dark. The worst moment came just before I reached the door. My flashlight beam landed on a wall of cracked plaster, and for a split second, I saw it. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Hair in ragged braids, a faded dress clinging to her. Her face was pale, eyes wide and dark, fixed on me. And then she smiled. Not the kind of smile a child should have too knowing, too sharp. I blinked, and she was gone. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I burst out of the mill into the fading daylight, lungs burning, hands trembling so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. The building loomed behind me, silent, watching. I left the ball inside, but sometimes I swear I can still hear it. That hollow sound of it rolling across concrete, followed by the echo of a little girl's laugh. And every time, I think of her face, that smile, waiting. And I know that if I ever step back inside that mill, the ball won't just roll toward me again. This time, she'll be standing there, waiting for me to pick it up. I've explored a lot of forgotten places, but the abandoned high school in rural Texas still sits with me in a way none of the others do. Schools are supposed to hold energy laughter echoing down halls, the squeak of sneakers in the gym, the buzz of fluorescent lights. But when that life is stripped away, the silence feels heavier than in any factory or house. It's like the building remembers and resents what it lost. The locals warned me about it. They said the school had closed back in 1980 after the district went bankrupt, leaving the building to rot. Some kids in town used it as a dare spot. Go in after midnight, walk through the locker rooms, see if you come out the same. They always said strange things happened in there. Whispers, slams, cold drafts in places with no windows. I didn't go in at midnight. I went in late one afternoon, when the sun was starting to dip and the shadows stretched long across the football field. The building loomed over me, its windows cracked and dark, like watching eyes. When I pushed the side door open, the smell hit me first. Old sweat soaked into concrete, rust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. The air was heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. Inside, the hallways stretched out in both directions, lined with faded trophies and shattered display cases. A banner still clung to the wall, brittle and yellow. Homecoming 1986. My boots crunched over broken glass as I made my way toward the gym. Everything echoed, each footstep came back to me louder than it should have. Like the place was trying to remind me I didn't belong. The locker rooms were underneath the gym, down a set of cracked concrete steps. The air grew thicker as I descended, damp and humid despite the dry Texas heat outside. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam swept across row after row of dented metal lockers. Some stood open like gaping mouths, others slammed shut and covered in rust. Graffiti scrawled in black marker bled down the walls' names, insults, crude drawings. But underneath it all, the silence pressed in like a weight. I started down the first row, running my hand lightly across the lockers as I went. The metal was cold, even clammy, like it had soaked up something it shouldn't have. I told myself it was just moisture, just the building decaying. But the further I went, the heavier my chest felt, like the air itself was getting thicker, harder to breathe. That's when it happened. I stopped to glance inside an open locker. It was empty except for a scrap of torn cloth clinging to a hook. And then I felt it, a hot, wet breath on the back of my neck. I froze. My skin crawled, every hair standing up. The breath wasn't faint. It wasn't a draft. It was close, humid, as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned slowly, heart hammering in my ears, flashlight shaking in my hand. No one was there, just the endless rows of lockers stretching into the dark. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. My instinct screamed at me to get out, but my legs wouldn't move. That's when the lockers began to slam, one by one, in rapid succession. Doors crashed shut all around me, first to my left, then my right, then down the row ahead of me. Metal on metal, sharp and deafening, until the sound blended into a single rolling thunder that filled the entire room. The echo was so powerful that dust rained down from the ceiling, filling the air with choking clouds. I dropped to a knee, coughing, flashlight beam cutting through the haze. The noise was everywhere, bouncing, rattling, making it impossible to tell where it started or ended. And then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick, absolute. My ears rang from the sudden absence of sound, but I could hear something else beneath it. Breathing, not mine, deep, labored breaths, coming from the lockers. I turned my light toward them, one row at a time. The sound shifted as I moved, like whatever was inside was following me. I edged backward, every muscle trembling, until I reached the stairs. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then every single locker door in the room burst open at once. The sound was like a cannon, metal slamming against metal, the force rattling the walls and shaking the floor beneath me. I staggered, nearly dropping the flashlight. And in that split second of chaos, I swore I saw something. A figure, small, thin, crouched inside one of the open lockers. Its face hidden in shadow, but I caught the gleam of eyes wide, watching. And then it was gone. I didn't wait. I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the fading light of day spilling over the cracked pavement of the parking lot. My chest heaved, my throat raw from the dust. When I finally looked back, the building stood silent, as if nothing had happened. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. That high school locker room wasn't empty. Something stayed behind when the last bell rang decades ago. Something that still breathes, waiting for someone foolish enough to step too close. And if you ever go down there, if you ever feel that hot, wet breath on your neck, don't turn around. Just run. I've been inside more than my fair share of abandoned places, mills, schools, factories, but walking into an old funeral home is a different kind of quiet. Even after decades, you can feel the weight of what happened there. It's not just an empty building. It's a space that held grief, finality, and the intimate work of preparing the dead. In Kentucky, off a rural two-lane highway, there's a funeral home that's been shuttered since the late 1970s. Most locals won't even drive past it after dark. They say the basement, the embalming room, is still alive in some way. I went there to see for myself. The house itself looked like any other aging Southern home at first glance. White paint flaking off clapboard siding, ivy crawling up toward a sagging roofline. But the windows were black and hollow. The sign out front still bore the family name, faded letters that barely clung to wood. When I opened the front door, a wave of cool, stale air rolled out, smelling faintly of mildew and something sharper underneath, like old formaldehyde trapped in the walls. Inside, the rooms upstairs were just as you'd expect. Dusty parlors with faded drapes, picture frames with the photos missing, chairs draped in yellowed sheets. The chapel still had rows of pews, hymnals stacked neatly as if waiting for another service that would never come. But I wasn't here for the chapel. I was here for the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My flashlight beam flickered across walls lined with peeling green paint, a clock frozen at 3:12 on the landing, its hands rusted. When I reached the bottom, the smell hit me, chemical and sweet, like a ghost of the work once done there. The embalming room stretched out before me, perfectly still. Stainless steel tables lined one side, drains set into the floor. Cabinets of old tools sat open, their contents gone but leaving rusty outlines where instruments had once been. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust. It looked like no one had been down there in years. And yet there was sound, a low, wet gurgling, like water running. It came from the drains. I swung the flashlight toward the floor. The drains were bone dry, no pipes dripping, no puddles anywhere. I swept the beam toward the sink's cracked porcelain, dry as a desert. Still, the gurgling continued, growing louder, almost like something breathing through the pipes. The hair on my arms stood up. My breath fogged in front of me, even though the air shouldn't have been that cold. I took a step toward the nearest table, the one in the center of the room. Its steel surface had dulled with age, but still held a faint reflection of my flashlight beam. I leaned over it, and that's when I saw him. In the reflection of the steel table, behind my own distorted image, stood a man. He was tall, shoulders hunched, wearing what looked like a dark suit, the kind you'd see on an undertaker from another era. His face was pale, eyes deep and sunken, fixed on me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs, flashlight slicing through the darkness. No one there, just the embalming room. Silent, empty. I whipped back to the table. The reflection was gone. Only my own wide-eyed face staring back at me. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was a trick of the light, my imagination. But then the gurgling in the drains turned into something else. Words. Low, murmured, like someone speaking underwater. I couldn't make them out, but they rolled through the room, growing louder, until it felt like the sound was coming from beneath the floor. I backed up toward the stairs. The flashlight flickered once, then again. My throat went dry. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a shadow slipping between the tables. I swung the beam toward it. Nothing. But the drains gurgled louder, now pulsing, as if the basement itself was drawing a breath. Then came the smell. Strong, sweet, sickly, like fresh formaldehyde. It burned the back of my throat, stung my eyes. The murmur from the drains rose into a whisper. Clearer now, though I still couldn't tell what it said. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs felt heavy, like the air had thickened into syrup around me. And then, just above the whispering, another sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the room behind me. I spun again. Still nothing. But when I looked back at the steel table, the reflection had returned. The man was closer now. Right behind me in the reflection, though the space behind me was empty. His mouth moved slowly, forming words I couldn't hear. His hands rose long, pale fingers stretching toward me. That broke the spell. I bolted for the stairs, my boots pounding against the concrete. As I ran, the whispering rose to a wail, the drains gurgling like something was forcing its way up through them. The smell of chemicals grew so thick it made me gag. I stumbled up the last few steps, slammed through the basement door, and didn't stop until I was outside in the daylight, gasping for air. When I finally looked back at the funeral home, it stood silent, its windows black and empty. But in one of the lower panes, just for a second, I swore I saw a pale face staring back at me, eyes sunken, lips moving as if it were still whispering. I've never gone back. But sometimes at night, when the house is quiet, I catch the faintest whiff of that chemical sweetness, and I hear the sound of water gurgling through pipes that should be dry. And I know whatever I saw in that reflection didn't stay in the basement. It saw me, and it remembers. I've walked through my share of abandoned places, but nothing has clung to me the way that old plantation ruin outside New Orleans did. The Deep South has a way of holding its ghosts close. The air itself feels thicker, heavier, like it's been steeped in memories too dark to fade. People in the nearby parish told me to stay away from the old Delacroix place. They said it was cursed. They said even the wildlife stayed clear of it. Of course, that only made me want to see it more. It was just after sunrise when I made my way down the narrow road. Spanish moss hanging from gnarled oaks like tattered curtains. The mansion was mostly a skeleton now, bricks scorched black from some long-ago fire, iron balconies twisted and broken, windows shattered out of their frames. The roof had caved in decades ago, leaving open gaps where the sky stared down at you. Inside, everything smelled of wet earth and mold. My boots sank into a carpet of rotted wood and plaster. The grand staircase was nothing but a collapsed heap. Banisters snapped like old bones. Faded wallpaper clung to the walls in long strips, curling at the edges, its pattern of roses barely visible under soot. The air was damp and still, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. I wandered room to room, flashlight beam cutting across overturned furniture and debris. There were scorch marks everywhere, like the fire had tried to erase the house from history but had somehow missed one thing. And when I found it, I stopped cold. Against the far wall of what must once have been a drawing room stood a mirror. It was huge, taller than I was, framed in tarnished gold leaf, its glass cracked but still intact. In a place where everything else had rotted, it was the only thing that looked like it still belonged. My light flickered across its surface and caught my own face, pale and drawn. I stepped closer. The glass shimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting not just me, but the ruined room behind me, the blackened chandelier, the collapsed ceiling beams. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just my nerves making the hair on my neck stand up. But then the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. One second the air was heavy and humid. The next it was cool enough that I could see my breath fog in front of me. The smell of wet earth was replaced by something else, faint but unmistakable. rosewater, and old perfume. I leaned into the mirror, heart thudding. My reflection stared back at me, and then, slowly, another figure slid into view. She was standing beside me in the glass. A woman. Tall, draped in black lace from head to toe, like she was dressed for mourning. Her face was pale, her eyes hidden behind a dark veil, her hands clasped at her waist. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She was just there beside me, close enough that if she'd been real, I would have felt the brush of her sleeve against my arm. I spun around. The room behind me was empty. No one. No sound except the drip of water somewhere deep in the house. I turned back to the mirror, my hands trembling. She was still there in the reflection. Only now she had turned her head slightly, as if she was looking directly at me. Even through the veil, I could feel her gaze, sharp, heavy, full of something I couldn't name. My chest tightened. I took a step back. Her head tilted, following the movement. The veil shifted, as if she had whispered something. But no sound reached my ears. I whispered, "Who are you?" into the silence. And that's when the cracks in the mirror began to spread. Tiny fractures, spider webbing outward from the center, racing across the glass like veins of frost. But even as the mirror splintered, her image stayed clear, undistorted, as if the cracks belonged to some other reflection entirely. Then the perfume grew stronger, suffocating, sweet, cloying. The air felt thick, pressing against me. My flashlight flickered and went out. For a heartbeat, the only light came from the mirror itself, faintly glowing, holding her image even as the room went black. I bolted. I didn't look back. My boots slammed against the warped floorboards as I stumbled out of the drawing room, through the sagging doorway, back into the overgrown yard. The air outside hit me like a slap, hot, humid, real. I gulped it in, shaking. When I finally dared to look back through the empty window frame, the mirror was still there, catching a sliver of morning Sunday. For a second, I thought I saw her, standing in the glass, one hand lifted as though to reach for me. Then the light shifted and she was gone. I haven't returned to the Delacroix place since, but sometimes, at night, when I catch my own reflection in a darkened window, I swear I see another face hovering just behind mine, a pale outline, a veil of black lace. And every time, I wonder if she really stayed there in that mirror, or if she followed me home. Hi. I just want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for being here. Your support means more than words can ever express. Every view, every like, every comment, it all helps keep this channel alive and growing. If you've enjoyed these stories, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really makes a huge difference. I'd also love to hear from you. Share your own experiences in the comment section, and let me know where you're watching from. Hearing your stories and seeing the places you all come from is one of the best parts of this community. Thank you again for being part of this journey with me.